It's so nice to see everyone again virtually. You're on Music and Chat with Shueh-li Ong, and it's a good morning from me to you in Nashville. Please say hi in the live chat and let us know where you're tuning in from, and don't be backward and coming forward. And remember to put any questions you may have in the same live chat, and I shall attend to them as the stream moves along. I just want to, at this point in time, also promote my reflection set. If you haven't got my CDs already, please scan the QR code and you will, voila, like magic, not quite like magic, but I'll post the 4 CDs to you along with a signed poster. If you want special dedications, just put them in the message or post a message under this video. Or you can send me an email or a message via my contact page on shueh-li.com, my website. Thank you. It is a little past 9:30 in Nashville, and we had a power outage in my neighborhood. I just moved to this neighborhood, so this is the first time I'm streaming from this area, this humble abode. So the internet service providers, that the network infrastructure is down. It has come undone, and I've had to piggyback off the data plan of my phone. So I've done this once before when I was streaming from Singapore, where we had a similar situation, but I've not done this in the States, at least in Nashville. So fingers crossed, but today's broadcast will be a most interesting one because I have a special guest with a special treat. Our guest, Jim Heckroth. You should know all about him by now. He is going to perform instead of me, and he's got a wonderful song he wants to play. I will leave it to him to tell you all about it. So please give it up for Jim Heckroth. Hi, Jim. Good morning.
Hi, Shueh-li. How are you doing?
I'm good. And you?
Good, good. You can hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, yes.
Excellent. So you've got a special treat for us. Please tell us about it.
Oh, well, I'm a musician and songwriter, part-time, musician and songwriter. And this is a recent song. It's just kind of a pop love song. And, I'm playing it on guitar. I think I may have written this one on the piano. I'm working on my piano playing. So, but I'll play it on this acoustic guitar. And that's it.
All right. Where
Shall
you
we
go?
start?
Thank you.
All right, here we go. I know that the party's going strong. I know that we haven't been here long, but now there's something else that I would rather do. I don't want to hang out with our friends. I don't want to stay until this ends. Tonight I really just don't feel like sharing you. Why don't we sneak on home? Just duck out of sight. Get away from the crowd, away from the loud, away from the lights. Turn off our phones, hold each other tight. Together alone in a world of our own, you and me tonight. And I know that they all want to stay, and they're gonna dance the night away. So if they don't see us escape, they'll never know. We don't need to make up little lies. We don't need to say our long goodbyes. We really could gather up our things and we could go. Why don't we sneak on home? Just duck out of sight. Get away from the crowd, away from the loud, away from the lights. Turn off our phones, hold each other tight. Together alone in a world of our own, you and me tonight. Tomorrow we can paint the town again the way we do. But tonight let's celebrate with just us two. Why don't we sneak on home? Just duck out of sight. Get away from the crowd, away from the loud, away from the lights. Turn off our phones, hold each other tight. Together alone in a world of our own, you and me tonight. Together alone in a world of our own, you and me tonight. Together alone in a world of our own, you and me tonight. Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We'll see you in a few minutes when you come
See you
back
then.
and talk to us. Yeah. Thanks,
Great.
Jim. So that was Jim Heckroth in one of his new songs. He might want to play for us again at the end of this live stream, so you hang in there, okay? So, Jim Heckroth, he is an interesting enigma of a guy, I would say. And how I discovered him, I had this paper. All right, it's mirror image at the moment, so let me just turn it around so you can read it properly. This is a paper, an application note actually. So this is for someone who wants to use this information. a tutorial on MIDI and wavetable music synthesis. This was released in '93 by Crystal Semiconductors, aka also Cirrus Logic. So, Jim Heckroth was the author of this tutorial paper, which he wrote while working for the company that I just mentioned. And I acquired my copy as head of marketing with a Singapore company that designed, manufactured, and marketed sound cards and PC multimedia products, I guess you could say, for the PC market. Crystal Semiconductors / Cirrus Logic, of course, are in the industry of making semiconductors and or aka ICs. Those of you who are not familiar with an IC or integrated circuit, it refers to a set of electronic circuits on a small flat piece of semiconductor material, often to be silicon. So anyway, long story short, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to actually get to chat with Jim, the author of this paper? I found him. You've met him. And let's talk to him. So please welcome back our guest, Jim Heckroth. You're back, Jim.
Oh, thanks, Shueh-li. Thanks for the introduction.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks so much for performing for us. I'm so honored you took the place of pride, the first act of the day.
How about that?
So, Jim, we know something about you, but could you briefly introduce yourself and your work history so we have an idea of who you are?
Sure. I've been a musician, a guitar player since I was a kid, and I went to engineering school and for electrical engineering. And I worked for a few companies before Crystal Semiconductor. I worked for E-Systems and Compact Computers and National Semiconductor. And Crystal was at that time looking for somebody because they were expanding their multimedia line and was looking for someone that knew something about music and MIDI and so on to be in the applications team because they were wanted to develop some wavetable synthesizer parts for the multimedia market, multimedia PC market. So I worked at Crystal Semiconductor and was involved in I wrote the tutorial because not a lot of people there knew about MIDI and how many notes of polyphony and how many timbres and all that kind of stuff, right? That we would need to know to market a new product, right? So, and that tutorial actually was adopted as Chapter 1 of the MIDI 1.0 spec by the MIDI Manufacturers Association. So, at Crystal, we developed a tiny wavetable synthesizer that was targeted at the multimedia market. Then at Crystal, I moved into marketing for pro audio products because Crystal had some many very high quality A to D and D to A converters and also.
For our viewing audience out there, as you know, I jumped on my phone data. It keeps on wanting to switch over to the network, which is powered up. It's just not doing its job, giving us the internet. Yeah, we should be good now.
Okay. Yeah. So I spent I don't remember 8 or 9 years maybe at Crystal Semiconductor and Cirrus, and then I moved to Silicon Laboratories, still doing engineering applications and marketing, but for semiconductors, but not music related stuff then. And so semi-retired 2 years ago. 2 years ago today, I think. 1st of July. Yeah. I think my last day of full-time work was June 30th, 2 years ago. Wow. But now I'm consulting for semiconductor companies. Excellent. And spending a little more time on music now.
So everyone, just bear in mind that Jim's done the gamut of of chores in that music technology realm. He's applications engineer, systems engineer, technical writer, strategic marketing person. That's about it, isn't it? Of course, we know him as being an excellent musician and songwriter. So, uh, but Jim, I do have. You did provide an interesting anecdote of a lunch you had with Bob Moog, and most of us here are Bob Moog fans. So please tell us about this activity, what was exchanged between the two of you, and what kind of person he was like for those of us who've not met him in person.
Oh, I found him a very nice guy. And, um, so Moog, Bob Moog and the company were in the Buffalo, New York area. And I grew up in Tonawanda, New York, which is kind of between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. So, 10 minutes away. And I think he was looking for musicians. He was going to expand his line from the strictly analog synthesizers he'd done. And this was in the, early 70s, I suppose. And so he went to some of the music stores in the Buffalo area and wanted to speak with musicians to talk about what their needs were, working musician kind of guys.
Yeah.
And so he went to the music store and said, "Who could you recommend that I talk to?" And the owner of the music store in Buffalo, which was Nyhart's Music, I think, suggested he talk to me, and he called me up and said, "Gee, can I take you to lunch?" And I said, "I'm a guitar player, I don't really know a lot about synthesizers. Of course, I know what a Moog is and love the sound of those products, but he said, well, let's talk anyway." And he took me to lunch and was very gracious. And yeah, we talked about all kind of stuff, but I don't know if I offered anything significant to him for his development efforts, but it was a very fun lunch, and I was very honored to be invited and spend the afternoon with him. So,
did he say, "Don't call me, I'll call you"?
He might have said that. I've tried to forget that part, but no.
Thanks
No, he
for,
didn't. He was, like I said, he was very gracious. He was a very nice guy.
Do you recall what you had for lunch?
I don't remember where we went or what we had. I remember him. So that
That's not a problem.
that was that.
That's not a problem. So, do you recall which year that was in? It was sometime in the 70s, you said?
It was sometime in the
previously?
70s. I think I graduated high school in 74, and I was in school for a couple years there, University of Buffalo. I took a year off and went on the road with a band. So it was sometime in there,
Wow.
early to mid 70s, probably the mid 70s maybe
Mid
then
70s. All right.
when I
So,
was playing. Yeah.
so let's zoom forward. Let's fast forward 2 decades later into the 90s because we want to talk about that briefly. The 90s gave birth to multimedia and the multimedia personal computer, also known as MPC. The MPC grew 3 standards with 2 years in between each upgrade standard. MPCs 1, 2, and 3 would be a platform for affordable gaming, home recording, and much more on the personal computer, aka some call them IBM compatibles. I remember when I was working in the industry, everyone just called them IBM compatibles. I guess that was one way to identify the other computers from PCs. So anyway, the contest was afoot amongst chip makers, hardware and software designers to come up with the best quality and highest fidelity solution with the best price tag. Jim, you told us a bit about Cirrus Logic and how you joined them. Do you recall what the computing scene was at that time? Anything that's left an indelible mark on you, or that you fondly recall, or maybe you recall with a little bit of fear?
Well, on the multimedia side, I know my involvement. Crystal made A to D converters, and they made them very high quality ones, but they had several different target markets and kind of different. There was two different divisions, I think, industrial and audio.
Mm-hmm.
And within the audio, there was the PC codecs basically that would go on a sound card or a motherboard even, and those had some of the multimedia requirements were implemented on the chip,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had pro audio stuff that was high-end converters that were used in professional recording equipment, mixers, instruments, and things like that, and then industrial stuff that was used for industrial applications, but the multimedia, you mentioned the multimedia standards, that was what, 91, 93, is that what you said?
Yeah,
I think 93 was MPC2. Yeah. And the MPC2, as I remember, it had so they had requirements for I think the multimedia PC standard 1 only required 8-bit audio recording and playback. You had to have a CD ROM drive with Redbook audio, so it'd play back 44K audio off a CD, but recording and playback for your own use was only had to be 8 bits, right? And you had to have a multi-timbral synthesizer, I think, on MPC1 and MPC2. They had two different levels of synthesizer options, a basic synthesizer or an advanced synthesizer. And the advanced synthesizer had to have, more polyphony and more timbres. I guess the multimedia PC, they both used the MIDI, what do you call it? The general MIDI was a set of 128 different patches. So, patch 1 is acoustic piano or something,
Yeah,
so they both used that.
I remember towards the end of that 128 set, we had helicopter, hand claps,
right, gunshot,
birds or something.
Yeah.
The helicopter was the one I
bird
couldn't
tweet.
quite figure out, but I guess that's useful for gaming. Who knows?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And the gunshots, back then, the multimedia games back in the early 90s came on a floppy disk, and so there wasn't enough bandwidth to spool audio on the early games, so they used MIDI to get the soundtrack in the background, and used a minimal amount of actual audio through the D-to-A, digital audio. But I remember games like you're out in space, and you're shooting your laser at the other ship or whatever, and the sound is the gunshot from MIDI, and things have changed a lot now that we stream audio at very high quality, and the games are amazing now, right? But anyway, I think the goal when I first hired on the project I was working on was to come up with a low-cost wavetable synthesizer that would meet and exceed the requirements for the advanced synthesizer requirements of the multimedia PC standard.
Meet and exceed. Could you tell us a bit about that development? I recall you mentioning something about you having to do some sampling.
Oh yeah. So this was I think we built it as the world's smallest wavetable synthesizer. I mean, we were trying to be very cost effective so we could hit the multimedia market. In a big way, and I think I found a board. Oh, this was one of the. This was a complete music synthesizer card, so with MIDI in and audio out, and the whole wavetable synthesizer on. This was one of the evaluation boards that I designed back then. This may be a broken one or something I found in the closet.
Can you imagine that, everyone? The generation today. Can you imagine having to deal with something like that? No clue.
Right. Well, yeah, the end consumer wouldn't use a card like this. This is something that this chipset would be designed onto the multimedia card, right? The sound card. Mm-hmm. And but this was an example of how the circuit might work. These cards would go to companies like yours back then that was doing those kind of products. But yeah, so to do that. Wavetable, my job, and it wasn't designing the chip. It was more helping with the definition of what it needed to be, being the sort of music guy in applications there.
Right.
And then I also got involved, as you mentioned, in the sample editing. You know, we had to have a wavetable sample set, and it was tiny and amazingly good sounding for the size of the chip and the cost of that solution. You know, it wasn't going to compete with a high-end synthesizer keyboard, but that wasn't the point of it. You know, a lot of those products would use D to A, high-quality D to A's from Crystal. You know, but yeah, so I was bringing in you know, guitars and basses and sampling and looping and, you know, all that sort of thing back then to do some. I did a fair amount of the sample set that was in there.
I recall during our prep session, you mentioned something about licensing some samples from Synclavier as well.
Yeah, I think it was the Synclavier license library, you know, for the, you know, orchestral sounds and all the drums and things like that we didn't have the bandwidth to sample. You know, we licensed the complete library, but then we had to go in with those because those were big orchestral samples and such, and we had to loop them and figure out how to minimize them down so we could fit them into the ROM space that we'd allocated for this product.
Yeah, there were many.
So
I'm sorry, Jim.
Oh, I was going to say, so, you know, part of my editing work was sampling, you know, a few things that I wanted to do myself, the guitars and things like that, and maybe even some of the vocal ahs and oohs and things like that. But then we also had to do a lot of processing on the library that we had licensed to trim it down to the something that would fit in our ROM budget.
Were you the only one responsible for processing these samples, or did
No,
you
I wasn't.
Other people? So
there was one of the designers was also doing a lot of the wave table editing. So there was really just two of us, I think, doing the looping and editing.
Speaking of gaming and sounds, do you recall perhaps the most popular sound card for gamers during that time? Because there were plenty of sound cards.
Yeah, but I think kind of a standard was the Creative Labs Sound Blaster and Sound Blaster Pro. I remember those names.
Yeah.
I know on the high end, Turtle Beach had some products that had, you know, high end wavetable synthesizers on them and things like that as well. You probably know more of those companies than I do.
I was just
they were
wondering
your competitors,
what you
right?
remember.
Yeah.
So I'm still holding to this precious copy of the tutorial that Jim wrote, and I'm going to hold on to it. I'm not giving it to anybody. In fact, I stored it in a plastic sleeve, and then I wrapped other things around it just to be sure it was in pristine condition. Look, it looks almost new, doesn't it?
It does. I'm honored.
Anyway, Jim had an interesting story to tell me about this tutorial, how it ended up from being its original function. You said its original function was actually for in-house use, and how it ended up making the rounds of, you know, the industry before landing up in the hands of the MIDI Association. Do you think you could give us a brief tale?
Yeah, but it started out, you know, I think I started writing it as educational material for in-house, as I mentioned. But then, you know, we decided it would also be useful for, you know, our customers that maybe weren't so familiar with MIDI and wavetable, you know, because the sound cards, earlier sound cards had an FM synthesizer part, and then the MPC2 had, you know, defined these basic and advanced synthesizers. So if you wanted to do the advanced synthesizer, you might want to know more about wavetable synthesis. But I remember we used to go to the Game Developers Conference. You know, I would go to that show, and some of those game developers got a hold of the MIDI app note, and they, you know, said, gee, this is a very informative thing, and they kind of started getting spread around. And at some point, we got a call from the MIDI Manufacturers Association, and they said, gee, that's, you know, we're about to publish the MIDI 1.0 spec. So I wasn't involved in development of MIDI or anything like that, you know, but they were about to publish the spec, and they said, this is a great tutorial that would be a great introduction to the whole standard, and can we use that as chapter 1 of the spec, and of course we said yes, please. So
Please have at
I
it.
think yeah, and that's been in the MIDI spec since then, But I think just last year, maybe the MIDI 2.0 specification was published by the MMA, and so probably my tutorial's not in there anymore. It's lived its life.
So this one is very precious because it's very detailed, very thorough, and very easy to grasp. At least for me, anyway. Because I've had to teach some of this. I think we've stopped putting MIDI in the course curriculum now, but until recently, I was still teaching MIDI. I only found this recently because I had it protected, and I was teaching in Singapore. But this definitely I will take back to show my students.
Yeah, we had requests at Crystal from several universities that asked could they use that as part of their curriculum, as part of their material for a course. So
thanks, Jim. So I want to show everyone a picture of another article that Jim wrote. Again, he's very knowledgeable in the application of and the designing of audio technology. At least this article is pertaining to that time. It's for the Audio Engineering Society that was presented in '94, and it's titled An Overview of Audio Technology for the Multimedia PC, aka MPC. So just remember, Jim is a very prolific writer in the technical sense. Or he was when he was working. He now writes songs, everybody. So the next picture I want to show, Jim mentioned how Cirrus Logic Crystal Semiconductors also targeted the pro audio market. This, I believe, is a picture from the booth at South by Southwest, where some of these pro audio pieces of equipment are on display to show the application of their chips at work. Jim, maybe you can give us a better understanding of this event.
Yeah, so this was during South by Southwest, which is a big event for the music, and they had a big multimedia section too. So film, music, and multimedia. And in the multimedia area, we had a booth in the convention center during that event, and the idea here was that Crystal's products were involved in through the whole chain of audio processing potentially. So these were all products. The things in the booth there were from our customers that they loaned us to show. And the idea was everything from maybe you're playing a keyboard in the first place, but it's if it's a digital kind of keyboard or a drum machine or something like that, it's got a D to A converter, and that it might be a high quality converter from Crystal Semiconductor, and that maybe goes into a digital recording device or a digital mixer, and then into a digital recording device. So there's a Mackie digital mixer there, and some Alesis ADATs, and maybe you're using some outboard processing, so you've got some digital reverbs and delays, and they've got A to D and D to A converters in them, and then. So in this demo, we actually, and then I think Crystal had come up with they had DSP products as well with integrated A to D and D to A converters. So they had a chip that would do a MP3 player, and so the demo here I think was I actually recorded. We recorded a song. The guy sitting at the desk there was doing recording, and I was playing, I think, and singing, and so we recorded onto. Through the mixer onto an ADAT, and then mixed it down on the spot, generated an MP3, and played it back on the MP3 player. And the idea was that all the A to D and D to A conversion through that whole chain was Crystal Semiconductor chips. So it was a pretty effective demo.
It's amazing.
Had a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, it's amazing what the 90s came up with. I remember, and Jim and I had talked about this during our prep session, sequencing. I remember when I used to have to do, trade shows, with our sound card, showing how quick it was to sequence with a wavetable sound card. and instantly you get a recording. You just play and voila, you have it already.
Gee, what trade shows did you do? We might have run into each other once back then.
I'm
I
sure we
used to
did.
go to a
We did do several NAMs. I do
uh-huh.
recall CBIT.
The
I believe,
CES show was a big one, right?
yeah, there were several.
See,
It's just been a while.
yeah.
I can't
I
remember
used
them all.
Yeah, I used to work the booths at the Crystal Semiconductor booths at the CES shows. I attended the NAM shows, but at NAM show, it was a different market. At CES, the attendees might be guys, companies like yours that were designing sound cards and multimedia and PCs and things like that. So we'd have a booth and they could come in and see what we were doing. And but NAM show, NAM, the attendees of the NAM show are more like the music store buyers or something, and it's the music equipment manufacturers that are in the booths. But those guys were our customers, so I would go to a
Mm,
NAM show just to visit the booths because those were potential customers.
absolutely.
But I loved, as a musician, I loved going to the NAM shows.
Yeah, I haven't attended a NAM show since 2010, I think, but don't tell anyone.
Yeah, it's about the same for me, maybe.
It's a fairly big expense. And also we had the pandemic. That's my excuse.
Right.
So, for our viewers out there, those of you who watched my interview with Chris Meyer, who talked about vector synthesis, you would remember when we unpacked the beginnings of MIDI. Well, Jim and Chris and a third party, Brian Watt, wrote the Understanding, Managing, and Protecting MIDI Recordings for a forum on tech-based IP management, intellectual property management. This looks like it was released in 96. Do you recall much of, Jim, do you recall much of your thoughts on the topic of protecting MIDI recordings?
uh, you know, I was not the expert out of that trio on the IP aspects of MIDI. I think, because I'd written the tutorial and had that background, I was included in that group, and we used some of that tutorial material as an introduction to that paper. But, you know, I think we talked briefly about this, you and I, recently, that you know MIDI is really performance data, right? Um, when a MIDI stream is live music basically, right? And once it's captured by a sequencer, then they timestamp each of those notes and store it as a MIDI file that you can play back later. But um, you know, melodies and lyrics are copyrightable. When you copyright a song, it's not so much the chord progression. Titles aren't copyrightable, but melodies are. And so if you're recording a song as a MIDI file, that might be copyrighted material. The
Mm.
melody itself that's embedded in those time-stamped MIDI messages. So it seems to me that there is a concern. How do you handle that, right? And I think that was sort of what we were addressing in that paper.
I'm
I don't
curious
remember the
as
details.
no worries. I'm curious as you're talking about melodies, because MIDI also s- records performance information, articulation, phrasing.